Welcome to Dialogue, a discussion series produced by WOSU Public Media and OSU's John Glenn College of Public Affairs. I'm Mike Thompson, WOSU's News Content Director, and I'll moderate our conversation. Our topic, critical race theory. What is it and why has it come under attack? Critical race theory emerged in the mid-1970s, but in the last 2 years it has risen to prominence. Social justice protests have caused us to rethink what we know about the history of race in America. From the role slavery played in building our economy and its part in forming political institutions, to a lack of knowledge about events like the Tulsa Race Massacre. Many question the lessons we learned or did not learn in school. Critical race theory, or CRT, argues racism is embedded in the American legal and economic systems. Many disagree, however. They argue supporters of CRT are trying to divide America and rewrite history. Over the next hour, we hope to live up to the mission of this dialogue series and dig deeper into this controversial topic in an honest and civil manner. Our guests are Hasan Kwame Jeffries, Associate Professor of History for OSU, and author Vince Ellison, who is a member of the Project 21 Black Leadership Network. Welcome to you both, and thanks very much for joining us here on Dialogue. Let's start with some definitions. Professor Jeffries, how would you define critical race theory?
Well, it's not that complicated. As you pointed out in the opening, it is a legal framework that was developed by a set and series of African-American legal theorists in the 1970s, Kimberly Crenshaw, Derrick Bell, that simply said, in order to understand America in the present, you have to understand the role of race and racism in America's past and present. That is it. It's nothing more than that. It's a way of simply making sense of America's criminal justice system. It's a way of those who have benefited from it, those who have been harmed from it. It's a way to make sense of America's capitalist economic system, those who have benefited from it and those who have been harmed from it. And so when you look at it in its most simplest as well as its most complex terms, it really is not that complicated.
Vince Ellison, do you disagree with that definition, or do you just disagree with the premise of critical race theory?
No. I agree with the definition. The definition is basically spot on. I disagree with how they are saying we have to deal with it and how we have to overcome it. I believe that in every civilization, you've had a hierarchy based upon unearned privileges, whether it be height, whether it be intelligence, whether it be born into a royal family. In America, they say that it's race, okay? Well, I believe I was born with some unearned privileges. One was being born with two great parents, a great family. One was, being born an American. I think it's an unearned privilege. And contrary to what a lot of other people might think, being born Black to me is a privilege. I don't think it's a burden at all, man. If I could choose to be anybody in the world, I choose to be me. And I choose to be a Black me. So being Black to me is not something that has led me to not be able to do what I've wanted to do in this country. But more than anything, I have my unearned privileges being born in Arab Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Therefore, it's impossible for me to feel inferior to anyone. And I've never met any man that's superior to me. So when it comes down to systemic racism or CRT, it doesn't have any effect on me one way or the other, because a racist is a fool. He's an idiot. Let him underestimate me if he wants to. I'll prove him wrong in the end. So I know racism exists. I believe that systemic racism is maybe part in some way of the American culture. However, I don't believe that I have to overcome it by asking my opponent for respite or for forbearance. I overcome it by defeating him, by being better than him, by outgrinding him. And that's what I've done in my life. So I'm an expert at my life experiences and the people around me and how they've accomplished great things. And I think that every American, if they are taught, racists is out there, racists are mean, racists are vicious, but that's why I'm a conservative. If this system is systemic, and if it is racist, and if it is mean, I want to shrink it. I don't want to expand it. That's one of the things that kind of confuses me when it comes to liberals. They say the system is racist, the system is mean, the system is oppressive, but we want to expand this system and put it over us.
All right, let's get
dismantle it and not have it over me.
Let's get Hassan Kwame Jeffries to weigh in here. Hassan, is critical race theory, is it a continuum? Have we seen, is the system changed over the course of our history, over the 250 years of the Republic, and then the 100 or so years before that, before slavery even when it started on this continent?
Of course, there's been change. There's been change over time. There has been substantial progress made as slavery ended 150 years ago. Legal segregation ended 100 years ago. But that doesn't mean that the systems that bore slavery, that gave birth to Jim Crow, suddenly began to produce or stop producing and reproducing inequality after 1965. And so, yes, I think on its surface, we have to acknowledge the ways in which change has occurred. But in doing that, we also have to acknowledge why change has occurred. It hasn't simply occurred because time has passed. Time is not a social force capable of creating change. Time is simply a unit of measurement. It has changed because people have called out the ways in which inequality is reproduced, not only through the actions of individuals and the beliefs of individuals, but also through the actions of the state, through systems and structures, the mortgage system, for example, the way in which it has reproduced inequality, has reproduced discrimination, even when the laws have changed and saying that we should not do it. So progress has been made, change has been made, but that doesn't mean that we have reached that more perfect union.
One of the tenets of critical race theory is that race is totally man-made. Basically, there is no differences between the races biologically, and critical race supporters argue that race is a social construct developed by one group to dominate another group. Vince Ellison, do you agree with that tenet of critical race theory?
I agree that race does not exist. It's an artificial construct. But I also believe that it is individual. Some people are just virulent and mean-spirited racists. Others are just as nice as they can be. It's not an absolute. It's on a sliding scale. In my life, what I've done is I've brought good people to me and I pushed bad people away. Again, I believe in individual freedom. I believe in being a man. Therefore, I say I'm supposed to arm myself with knowledge for the wise man and with a gun for the fool. I do not depend on my government to protect me. I protect myself. And because I protect myself, I don't have white racists or any type of racists come to me and do me any type of harm. I don't believe that a racist government that was, of course, supported by George Wallace and Orville Faubus and Lester Maddox and many of these racists that are in the government right now will ever protect me. Therefore, it's my position that I protect myself, I protect my family, I protect my property. So when we start talking about these systems and we start talking about asking these systems to change, I think we need to change ourselves because we need to come to a basic conclusion here. The police are not bound to protect you. Even legally, the Supreme Court has ruled that you cannot sue the police department for not protecting you. Your Second Amendment rights give you, well, you already have the right to protect yourself. You need to exercise it as a free man, and I'm not begging the government to do anything for me. I'm telling them to get out of my way.
All right. Hassan, again, this tenet that race is a social construct, but it is a very ingrained part of American life. It may not be biologic, but it's part of who we are as a society. So does that put it, is that it's man-made, but it's also, it's here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. Would you agree?
Well, that's a conundrum. And this is where Mr. Ellis and I agree that race is a social construct. Race is not real. It's biologically meaningless. But at the same time, it is socially meaningful, and it's also culturally relevant because we use race as a stand-in for cultural heritage and cultural ancestry. And it's socially meaningful because we have used race, speaking broadly, over the last 500 years in global society to create hierarchy and privilege for some and disadvantage others. So in that sense, we can't pretend as though race isn't relevant, although it's biologically meaningless. And so on that point, we agree. But I think it's also important, while on the one hand, we say race isn't real, we have to acknowledge that racism is real. And this is, I think, where Mr. Ellison and I depart. And it manifests itself both in personal ways, prejudicial beliefs and behaviors, but it also manifests itself in institutional ways, systems and structures. And it's critically important that we have to acknowledge that. Mr. Ellison had pointed out and referenced sort of Bull Connor and George Wallace in Alabama in 1963. If the problem in Alabama, when Martin Luther King went down there in 1963 and confronted the police and that police state, with an attempt to overturn Jim Crow. If the problem in Alabama simply had been the prejudicial beliefs and behaviors of an individual, George Wallace, then the solution to police violence, the solution to economic inequality, the solution to racial discrimination in Alabama would have been really simple. Just remove Bull Connor. And they succeeded in doing that 2 months after the movement began. And guess what didn't happen? Racism did not end. Inequality did not end. Structural inequality, job discrimination did not end. Poverty did not end. And it simply wasn't because Black folk weren't working hard enough. It's because the way in which this system for 250 odd years, the economic system born in slavery and continuing through Jim Crow had not changed.
Vince Ellison, don't you agree that you're very passionate that individually you are fighting this fight on your own? You're proud of who you are. You're not going to be have somebody else tell you who you are, what you can and cannot do. But not everyone is in that situation. Is there a role for government, for the community, for people of all races to fight discrimination as a group rather than wait for individuals to make that progress on their own individually?
No. Government will not solve the problem. It never has. It never will. The problem isn't that some white people think they're superior. The problem is that too many Black people believe that they are inferior. Too many Black people believe it. As I say again, the greatest thing you can teach somebody is to love themselves. And that's something that the Civil Rights Movement did not do. It taught us to try to change the minds of white people toward us. That's not going to work.
How about the Voting Rights Act? Because you have a lot of pride in who you are, but if you had to count the jelly beans in a jar to be able to vote, I mean, that was a role for government to change that law, to do away with those kind of practices which were designed to keep Black people from expressing their right to vote.
Black people have the right to vote right now, and they're still voting in people that are locking them in bad schools, locking them in ghettos, aborting their babies, taking their guns away, opening the border. The vote wasn't the thing that did anything for us. What will free Black people is getting connected back with their God, understanding economics, learning how to buy and sell, and also arming yourself to do what you need to do to any races that will bother you. See, cowardice always brings about aggression. And we had more Black men in South Carolina and Mississippi than we had white people. And we had the right to vote back in 1870, but we were too afraid to exercise it. We wouldn't exercise the right to vote because there was Black male cowardice in the Black community. And right now, the smash and grabs in the Black community has nothing to do with white racism. The dope being sold, the people being shot, has got nothing to do with white racism. We're doing it to ourselves. It is a fratricide. It's a dystopia where we are running we are the governors, we are the city council, we are the people that are running the schools.
Hassan Kwame Jeffries, I want to get you to respond to this.
So it has nothing to do with white racism, it has to do with us.
Hassan, let me get you to respond to this. The role of government, of community organizing to combat racism, is it essential in this struggle?
It is absolutely essential that government play a role in removing the barriers to equality that government itself erected, whether on the federal level, state level, or local level. Government is essential to protect those measures that are designed to ensure equality, as we're seeing right now with voting rights. So there's absolutely a fundamental role for government in addressing the problems that government helped create in the first place. But at the same time, that does not mean, and we have to be careful as we look at history and we look at the ways in which African Americans have organized for change. Mr. Ellison, you pointed out, sort of that post-emancipation period when African Americans secured the vote and the franchise following the 15th Amendment. Oh, let's be clear. they voted, and they voted in great numbers. But the reason why voter participation declined starting in the 1880s and beginning solidly in 1890, between 1890 and 1910, is because every single state in the Confederacy, former Confederacy, rewrote their state constitutions for the sole purpose of disenfranchising African Americans, and they enforced those mechanisms through racial terror. 2 to 3 African Americans being lynched publicly every week for 3 decades. That was the effect. And so let's not pretend as though somehow Black men and Black women, Ida B. Wells, a Winchester rifle deserves a place of honor in every Black home, did not fight back because they fought back at great risk to themselves and lost their lives. And that is not anything new, but a spirit of resistance born in slavery that continued even beyond the end of the high point of the civil rights movement.
All right, this is a dialogue, and we encourage you, the viewer.
What you mentioned, though, was Black intimidation, white intimidation on Black men. Black men that made up the majority of the populations in the state of Mississippi, in South Carolina, and 47% in Alabama and in Georgia. Now, let's be clear. Fighting back is not the same as winning. The rest of them did not fight back. The rest of them went back on the plantation, did what the white man told them for over 100 years, and asked the federal government to come down to protect them. And that federal government now is still taking advantage of them because most of their children still can't read. Most of their children have been aborted. They still have they destroyed the family structure. They have completely dismantled and made the Black community into a dystopia. So your government that you are depending on has become the master again and is killing Black people in astronomical numbers. Matter of fact, if you go back to abortion, and if you go and you look at what's going on now in the inner city, we're killing more of each other than the white man ever killed. Also, with our abortion rate, we killed 30 million, and they done that before they were even born. We look at mass incarceration. The government is doing that. Why you depend on the government after its a track record of beating the hell out of Black people for the last 200 years? I really don't understand why. I want them out of my life.
All right,
I don't want them
let's take a question.
Children. I don't want them protecting me.
Vince Ellison, we're going to interrupt you here.
So
we're going to take a question from our audience. This is a dialogue. We welcome you to join in our conversation. You can do so by using the Q&A function on Zoom. If you're a little shy and don't want to actually ask a question yourself, you see one you like, use the thumbs up sign to endorse a question, and that will move higher up in the ranking. Diana Bergman, let's go to the questions.
Some great questions. Here's one kind of getting us back on track about critical race theory. Isn't the question about trusting the government? Are our institutions built on racism and therefore fundamentally racist? So getting back to
let's start with you, Vince Ellison. Our institutions, would you agree that some of our institutions have a racist history and some of that history lingers today?
I think it has a racist history. I think some of the people in these institutions are racist. I can't say that everybody in the institutions are racist. I think that the most racist institution in the United States of America is the government-run educational system. We see what it does in Baltimore. We see what it does in Detroit and Memphis to these young Black children. Yet that same government that my friend Dr. Jeffrey loves so much is destroying the Black educational system and has destroyed the Black family and has unarmed us so we can't defend ourselves. We need to do what Dr. Bell said, who basically started critical race theory and said that Brown versus Board of Education was a bad decision. We need to get our children out of a quote unquote systemically racist system. Why we think that it's good to put Black children in a systemically racist system to educate them is beyond me. It's like asking Jews to put their children in the school run by Nazis. And we've seen the end result. It's insanity.
Hassan Kwame Jeffries, government institutions. Can you point to some that the legacy of racism continues?
Well, certainly. You can look at the criminal justice system. So in that sense, I agree with what Mr. Ellison has said. And, I find it humorous that he thinks I'm in love with the federal government. I'm not in love with the federal government, any government. What I am is want to hold them accountable and responsible for their obligation to African Americans who are equal citizens in this nation. So they absolutely have a responsibility to do what we as taxpayers are paying them to do. And when they fail to do that, we hold them accountable. There's a long history of government irresponsibility and purposefully discriminating against African Americans. Let's be clear. I mean, that's not a surprise. Critical race theory explains that. But that doesn't mean that we follow the particular sort of conservative talking point of government is the problem. Well, certainly it has a long history of doing that. But that doesn't mean that you don't hold government accountable, because the government resources that we as African Americans put into it, and citizens in this nation, have a responsibility and obligation. Now, we have to talk about, we also, along those very same lines, when we think about sort of individual racism and all this other stuff, look, we could take out all the prejudicial beliefs and behaviors in the hearts and minds of every single person in America today. And guess what? We would still have racially disparate outcomes. We have to deal with that. And we don't deal with that, if you want to take education, for example, simply by saying, oh, we're leaving these public schools. These are our schools. These are the institutions that we have invested in and we have a vested interest in. We can't play this little game of charter schools and price born of segregated white academies and all this other stuff. No, the vast majority understand that the public deserves to be educated within public schools. This isn't something that is a 21st century creation. This was the demand of formerly enslaved African Americans who gave birth to the public education system immediately after emancipation, because they understood that there was a role for government to be responsive to the demands and needs of African Americans.
All right, we have another questions from our audience. Diana?
This is a great question to follow that up. Can you give us some examples of what those opposed to teaching critical race theory do not want to be taught to children at various education levels?
Start with you, Mr. Ellison.
Well, yes, parents have a right to decide how their children are educated. I disagree with Dr. Jeffries that believe the government, it's a socialistic, communistic concept that believes government should control the minds of their citizens and educate them. That's the system in communist China and in the USSR. But again, in 1954, when the Soviet Union decided to infiltrate the civil rights movement, they gave instructions that they should make the Black community a replica of the communist bloc, and they've done very, very well. You have one-party rule, dictator worship, government control of education, healthcare, and everything else. And after 200 years of it, they want more. It's like, it's almost like having a battered wife, Stockholm syndrome. The more they beat you, the more you like it. And when they offer you your freedom, you run back on the plantation again. I believe in freedom. That means freedom to educate my children the way I want to educate them, which is what I do. I pay for my children's education out of my pocket. But anyone that doesn't understand that to put the government, which and a government you claim is racist, over the education of your children, and then believe that you can beg that racist government to educate your Black children correctly, something they have never, ever done, ever. They say they hate you, and you give your children to them. They say they despise you, and you beg them to take their children. They tell you that they will destroy you, and you say, please take my children. Why don't you just be expeditious and blow your own damn brains out?
Hassan Kwame Jeffries, we'll talk about education. How should race be taught in the schools today? I use the example of the Tulsa race massacre. I was 52 years old, had no idea that had happened until I saw the HBO series Watchmen. It was stunning that I'd never learned about that in school, and I wasn't alone. African-American colleagues of mine said they were very familiar with it through their families and through their colleagues in their community. Obviously, that was one shortcoming in our education. How should race be taught in our schools? And to Mr. Ellison's point, can we trust the current system to do it correctly?
Well, race should be taught openly and honestly. Race and racism should be taught openly and honestly in our schools, whether we're in public schools or whether we are in independent private schools. There is no hiding from the reality that race and racism has shaped the contours of American life and Black life in the past and the present, and that it continues to shape the contours of African American life and American life in the present. So we have to confront it. The problem is that we as Americans actually hate history. What we love, as my friend Reggie Gibson, out of Boston says, we actually love nostalgia. Hate history, but love nostalgia. We love stories about the past that make us feel comfortable in the present. And that not only is sort of the myths and misconceptions rooted around sort of the American dream and the fantasy of pilgrims landing on Plymouth Rock and all this other stuff and Thanksgiving. But it's also, and I got to disagree with you, Mr. Ellison, on this, it's also this myth of somehow Black folk have been under the heel of white folk and have been suffering and running back to plantations because they don't know any better. The history of the African American freedom struggle is the history of making not only strides for African Americans to thrive and strive in an environment that was working against them, through racial terror and purposeful discrimination, but in that process, also transforming this nation itself. You know, there was a moment in time, perhaps, when we could have returned back to the motherland, but that never actually occurred. Whether we were talking about Liberia or we were talking about Marcus Garvey, the harsh reality is we have an investment here, and I think you would agree with that. But at the same time, we have a community responsibility, and the community of Black folk has always been what has held Black people together. That has not fundamentally changed. The shape and figure of it may look a little different, but it's still there. I think I have a little bit more faith in Black folk, Brother Ellison, than you necessarily do at the same time.
You're the one who want to turn over the government, not me. I think Black folks can handle it. I'm telling you, we need our own schools. You say that we need the government to do it. I said we need to defend ourselves. You want the police that have been beating the hell out of us to do it. I say that we need to secure our own neighborhoods. You want the dope addicts and the dope pushers to secure it. I'm telling you, I have more faith than you do. You want the government to take care of us. I'm telling you, we can take care of ourselves. So let's get this straight now. I'm the one that says I don't need government. I'm the one that said the Black people, before we so-called integrated with the government and told them to take over our lives, that we were moving faster ahead economically than white America. We flatlined economically since 1968. We integrated baseball and football and basketball. We had Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali. We had the Harlem Renaissance, man. Tuskegee, according to Forbes magazine, the Tuskegee Institute had created 3 times more millionaires than Harvard, Yale, and Princeton combined. After we integrated, the whole community went downhill. So Black people knew what they were doing until a bunch of integration-minded Negroes wanted to get together with the white community and say that our institutions aren't good enough. We need you to lead us. And they led us straight to hell. So no, I have faith in the Black community. I think you're the one that's lacking.
Hassan, I'll give you a chance to respond, and we'll move on to something else.
Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to respond. We can't confuse the broad spectrum of activities and approaches and strategies to change that have always historically defined the African-American community. So on the one hand, you certainly have had integrationists, and let's talk about Booker T. Washington. If you want to tout Booker T. Washington and his accommodation. I went to a Black college. I went to Morehouse College. I understand.
That's right. So you know, Tuskegee was a Black school.
So we have to understand, Brother Ellison. We have to understand that there are those who you want to tout who had a particular accommodationist approach to change. That's fine. I understand that. But let's not confuse those with people like Stokely Carmichael coming out of the civil rights movement, the Black Power era, who demanded Black institutional control, who demanded control of of schools in Black communities. And
That's
Black
not what you're advocating. You're advocating government control.
Hold on, brother.
You're advocating government control.
Hold on.
Let's thank you very much. I appreciate that. We're on Zoom. We can't speak over each other, Brother Ellison. Listen. So what I'm saying is we look at this question of, political conservatives like to talk about local control until it comes to the Black community. Bring the resources. We still live in a rigidly segregated. Hey, you want to talk about segregation? We still live in a rigidly segregated society. And you're right. There were real flaws with Brown because it didn't deal with the de facto segregation in urban communities. So there are issues there I think we can agree on. But let's not play the silly game of saying that, if you want to hold government accountable for what it has done in the past and responsible for the obligation that it has to its citizens, that somehow that means you don't have a legitimate critique. And you want to talk about police? Let's talk about police, because it was political conservatives who lost their mind on this issue of defund the police. All we're talking about there is holding the police accountable for the actions that they're supposed to be responsible to all citizens, to protect and serve. I don't know when that model, I'm in New York City, right? Courtesy, professionalism, respect, CPR. If that's what you're saying that you are about, then all anything Black folk are saying is you need to hold yourself to that standard itself. Do we need to shrink police and police departments, defund? Absolutely. But when that was brought up as an issue, suddenly political conservatives forgot what it meant to defund and reallocate resources.
Let's take a breath here, Mr. Ellison. I want to dig a little deeper into your contention that it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are in favor of increased segregation, that you do not trust the white system to change, so you are advocating that African Americans, other people of color, take matters into their own hands and develop their own systems, their own schools, their own individual protections to force change. How does that help heal the racial divide in this country?
No, that's not what I'm advocating at all. I'm advocating that black people be allowed to go to schools they want to go to, whether they're white, whether they're black, whether they're Jewish. I have a daughter right now that goes to a Christian academy that's about 90% white because I'm a Christian. I don't see color. You know, and that's the problem. We see nothing but color. We have gone into this world and we want to tell our children that everything that's wrong with them has to do with the fact that they're black, as opposed to how they react in society, how they handle themselves, how they are they getting a good education. No, we're not talking about resegregation, but we're resegregated anyway. Harvard did a study that said America is more segregated now than it was before Brown versus Board of Education. These are the facts. Everything the civil rights movement said they wanted to do, they failed. Nevertheless, they doubled down. They created a dystopia where before the civil rights movement, 70% of children were born to two-parent families. Now 70% have been born out of wedlock. We have 10 times more men in prison. Our schools are dysfunctional. We were educating our children before the civil rights movement. Now we're not. We're saying that government will never do it because government has always been our oppressor. It hadn't been, I can deal with the individual guy, the individual racist that's around me. I can't deal with 15, 20 state troopers. I can't deal with the FBI. So if we shrink government and say, people, here's your freedom. I don't know why people have a problem with a child not being educated in a school in Baltimore, and there's a charter school or private school down the way, like they have in Washington, D.C. and in New Orleans, and these children go and get a good education. I'll tell you why. Because if black people ever become educated, the liberals will lose complete control over them. They have to keep them uneducated, under control, and in fear. And this is why, even though it costs maybe 3 times more for the public educational system to educate a black child badly, and even though charter schools and vouchers have been very, very strongly advocated and have done a very good job in DC and in New Orleans and in other black schools all over this country, the left and the Democrats are completely against them. Because if they ever lose 90% of the black vote, they're dead in the water. And they know.
Hassan Kwame Jeffries, I want to get you to respond to this, and we'll try to get back to critical race theory tenets in a moment. But this argument that Democrats, in particular white Democrats, are using race, using African American voters for political gain. How do you respond to that?
I say if we want to talk about the politics of race and specifically the politics of racism, then you don't need to look at the Democratic Party, certainly not the current manifestation or configuration of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, of course, has a long history of segregationist politics. This was the party of secession. This was the party of the Dixiecrats. This is the party of segregation. But then there's a fundamental turn when the Democratic Party, with its solid base in the Northeast and the Midwest, embraced the civil rights platform under John F. Kennedy and more thoroughly under Lyndon B. Johnson. And then as a result of that, the Republican Party flipped the script, if you will, and welcomed into its fold those white Americans in the South, whether they were in rural communities or urban centers, and white Americans in suburbs who were most animated by calls for racism, camouflaged as law and order. And so what we see from Richard Nixon to Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump is political conservatives rallying around racism itself, which we know is the most powerful political organizing tool in America. And so, you know, I tend to take African Americans seriously as political thinkers. They are surveying the land, looking at the political landscape and making legitimate decisions based upon which party offers them the best opportunities to create change through the existing political structure. And clearly, that ain't the Republicans right now. That doesn't mean that Democrats are perfect. It simply means that the options aren't that great.
I want to get to this issue of colorblindness. Mr. Ellison, you brought it up a few moments ago. CRT supporters say that the neutral standard only addresses the most serious cases of racism, not the more subtle practices that prevent equal opportunity. That if you say colorblind, that, you know, the march on Charlottesville and things like that, lynching and overt racism is obvious, but the subtle things they fly under the radar. They don't get noticed. What's your reaction to that? What is your response to that argument?
Well, first of all, I'd like to respond to what Dr. Jeffries said. After seeing what the Democrat Party and those liberals did to black people, the white conservatives were very, very smart to cut them loose and not join that suicidal pact. So yeah, they were looking ahead. They were seeing what the liberals were going to do. They saw what they did to black people, and they said, yeah, we were right to not to have any parts of it. But when it comes down to being colorblind, I'm a black man. I'm proud of being a black man. To not look at me and say that I'm black is an insult to me. It tells you my story. I'm not going to ask the government or any third party to fight my battles. If a person is a racist, I don't want to work for him. Let me know, please. If a person is a racist and has a restaurant, I don't want to give him my money and I don't want to eat his food. Please let me know. As far as microaggressions are concerned, I don't care. My job is to love myself. I can't control what you do. You drive yourself crazy trying to control other people. As a Christian, Jesus always told us, look at yourself. Don't worry about the splinter in your neighbor's eye. Worry about the beam in your own. Everything that I do, I go back to me. He hates me. I love him. He lies on me. Tell the truth on him. He's my enemy. Feed him. That's how I bring you to me.
But there are things in your life, Mr. Ellison, there are things in your life that you cannot control.
I'm not concerned about the
But there are things in your life that you cannot control. You get pulled over by a police officer.
Right.
African-American males are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than white Americans. And that's something you don't have the choice to say, I'm not going to eat at your restaurant or I'm not going to get pulled over by this officer. Isn't there a systemic role there that has to be overcome? The stats are there.
I believe that when you start dealing with the police, it's a whole different concept. That's why I'm always armed. If a police officer wants to, I've never had a problem with a police officer in my life. I'm 58 years old. I'm respectful. He respects me. I treat him with respect. I believe there's a human element that deals with any situation. And again, because of that, I'm pulled over. I don't have a problem with police at all. Now, again, if I ever meet that one that thinks he's going to get his good time by beating on me or anybody that I care about, it's that old saying, I would rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6. I'll deal with it.
Hassan, to this issue of colorblindness, the folks who are critical of critical race theory, they use the quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that they want to be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. What is wrong with that in today's society?
The only thing that's wrong with that in today's society is what is wrong with the interpretation from when Dr. King said it in 1963 during the March on Washington, is that he wasn't talking about the moment. That was an aspiration that he was articulating. He said, we got to get there. We have to get to the moment where my children are judged by the content of their character rather than by the color of their skin, whether that be them being judged by individuals or them being judged by police officers, institutions, teachers, and the like. He said, we got to get there. But the only way that we can get there, and too often we political conservatives don't want to talk about this when they talk about judging content and character. He said, the only way for us to get there is for us to acknowledge the real differences that exist. See, when we can't fall into the colorblind trap. Now, I respect what Mr. Ellison is saying about individual action and behavior and responsibility, and you got to work hard. He worked hard, no doubt. His family worked hard, no doubt. I worked hard, no doubt. My family has worked hard, no doubt. But that doesn't mean that those who have worked equally as hard have been able to achieve as much. The question then becomes why? Why is it that we know the statistics in terms of African Americans being born in particular communities in certain neighborhoods that we can almost predict their future with certainty, while just across the highway and other neighborhoods and other communities, we can predict with almost scientific certainty a better outcome. That has nothing to do with individuals not working hard and not striving hard. So when we fall into the colorblind trap, and pretend as though we just acknowledge that race is real, that race isn't real, but racism is. When we fall into the colorblind trap and don't acknowledge the way that race and racism still impact outcome, then you're doing two things. One, you're actually setting up people for failure. You can't have a race, Mike. You can't have a 100-yard race and put hurdles in front of people and then say, go run, and not tell them that the hurdles are there. That doesn't mean they can't go over them. That doesn't mean they can't jump them, but it sure does help if they know that they are there. And that's what we're talking about. When we pretend as though race isn't real, we're saying that go forth and there are no obstacles when we know that they are. And also, lastly, when you say, I have no problem when people acknowledge and see me as an African American, that to me is important. The insult is not that you see me as a black man. The insult is that you pretend that you don't. Because my experiences as a black man born in Brooklyn, New York, and gone to school in the South, my parents' experiences as black people in the Northeast, my grandparents' experiences as black folk in the South, my great-great-grandparents' experiences as enslaved folk in Georgia and Virginia fundamentally have shaped who I am. So don't pretend you don't see me, because then you don't see my history and who I am.
Let's get to some questions from the audience. Diana?
Sure. Why has critical race theory become such a hot button issue when its purpose for the past 40 plus years has been to discuss the presence of racism in the construction of certain institutions? Why would less facts be a good thing?
Vince Ellison, I'll let you take that one.
Well, it started really after the George Floyd riots of in 2020, and Black Lives Matter and was involved in that. And somehow or another, I think from the Heritage Foundation, a gentleman started writing pieces on critical race theory, and he started connecting it with Black Lives Matter and their mission. And of course, since you know everything was so controversial back then, that when they connected Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd thing to it, it turned into something very, very controversial. And then Black Lives Matter started the Black Lives Matter in school thing. And a lot of parents started saying, hold it, I don't like this, just because it was guilt by association in a lot of ways. But when they started going to the school board meetings and started talking about it, it blew up. And you have some parents that don't care about how their children are educated. That's a very small minority. You have some parents that take their children out of public education, put them in private schools. That's another, that's another small minority. Then you have those in the middle that kind of want to trust public education to educate their children. And when they started hearing that CRT was going to teach their children to hate themselves and say that some are racist and some are not, it kind of blew up. So yeah, and like what Dr. Jeffrey said, yeah, the hurdles exist, but I don't believe in asking government to move the hurdles. I teach my children how to jump over them. My father taught me how to jump the hurdles. He said they're there. They're not going to remove them. And if they tell you they're going to remove them, they're lying to you. They're going to put more of them in front of you. I'm teaching you to be better. I'm teaching you to jump over them. And if a brilliant man like Dr. Jeffries and a few other his brothers would start black private schools, they teach these black boys the same thing, instead of leaving them at the mercy of a government system that fears them and will teach them always that they are below them. As critical race theory kind of says, they got people believing that black people are inferior to white people. Now, if it says that or not, I don't know.
Professor Jeffries,
they're telling black people that white people are superior, black people are inferior, and that white people have to pull themselves down so we can catch up with them. That's lunacy. Professor
Jeffries, how should critical race theory, should it be taught in school? Should it be taught to all ages? Why has this become such a hot button issue? That's the title of our session today.
Well, if your child is being taught critical race theory, congratulations, because that means they're in law school. It's not being taught in K through 12 anywhere. But what should be taught in K through 12 is a serious history on the role of race and racism in American society in age-appropriate levels, in age-appropriate ways, of course. We can't ignore that. We can't pretend as though America history didn't happen. The African-American writer and essayist James Baldwin said, we are our history. And in order for us to understand who we are, we have to look at that history. We have to study that history. We can't pretend as though those aspects of that history that make us uncomfortable, somehow we can ignore, because that is who we are as well. And with regard to how this came about, Mr. Ellison is absolutely right. This was a manufactured crisis born out of politically conservative think tanks in response to literally the largest protest in American history following the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis by police in Minneapolis. 20 to 30 million people taken to the streets in June of 2020, 20 to 30 million people taken to the streets in July of 2020, not only demanding justice for the victims of police violence, but also demanding an end to systemic racism. And this is where political conservatives got scared, because the only way that you can respond to millions of people, not only in the United States, around the globe, saying, look, we got a problem here and we need to deal with it. We need to deal with the way racism is reproduced in our systems and structures, is the only way to deal with that is actually to change the systems and structures, to change the way we do policing, not just firing one or two police, to change the way we allocate resources to public schools. I'm with you there, Brother Elliston. We need a fundamental reallocation of those resources. But you have those who benefit from it and say, no. The only reallocation that we're going to do is not sending more into communities that are under-resourced, but by pulling the resources out and sending them into Christian schools, sending into majority white schools that were birthed out of the segregationist private education movement coming out of the late 1960s and early 1970s. And so it is a manufactured political crisis. It's hysteria because it ain't being taught. Nobody's teaching white children that they should feel shame or blame or fundamentally oppressors. No white child in school today is responsible for the institution of slavery. No white child is responsible for Jim Crow. No white child is responsible for the foolishness that we see going on in America today. But they are responsible for tomorrow. And it is our responsibility as educators to tell them the truth about the past so that they can be adequately prepared to address the future. And the other point, if I may, Mike, real quick,
Sure.
is part of the hysteria in trying to appeal to African Americans is the false belief that somehow talking and teaching about race and racism and the real world obstacles that have been historically and continue to be placed in front of African Americans is somehow conditioning Black folk and young Black kids to believe that they are inferior. That's absurd. Nobody's telling Black people they can't achieve, but it's preparing them for what's ahead of them. You know, this is Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, go Buckeyes. That's like sending a quarterback out and saying, go achieve, and not telling him that there's a defense out there. That's absurd. Just setting them up for disaster and failure. They could be the most prepared in the world, but unless they know there's a free safety out there and some linebackers, they cannot achieve. And that's what we're saying we have to do. That's why we got to have these honest conversations.
So, Mr. Ellison,
Mr.
Ellison, let me ask you a question. Vince, let me ask you a question. How should race be taught in school? Is it bad to say, you know, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, but he also thought that African Americans or freed slaves should go back to Africa? He didn't always support abolition of slavery early in his career. Shouldn't we be taught all of that spectrum rather than just he was the great emancipator?
Yes. Two things. Number one, the reason why a lot of middle-class America turned on public education when they saw what they were going to do with critical race theory is because they saw what they had done to Black children. They saw that you had taught that the public educational system was involved in teaching Black children, and 50% of the Black boys that dropped out, that they had taught most of these young Black children to hate themselves because they killed each other on an industrial level. They saw how they act in the streets. They saw the Black ghettos when they go into Baltimore and Detroit, and they said, this is what they've done to the people they say they love. We don't want this happening to our children. And it made common sense. Now, when it comes down to teaching race, we have to be very careful. Because as we start teaching history now, we understand that we go back over George Washington, we go back over Thomas Jefferson, and there's some things that people are talking about we don't want the children to know. We don't want children to know about Sally Hemings, maybe. We don't want to know about Thomas Jefferson, half-white children. When you start going into the civil rights movement, and when you start going into slavery, these are things we can talk about too. We can talk about why Black men didn't rise up and defend themselves and fight and kill their masters. Some did. Frederick Douglass fought his master, beat him up. You have others that fought and killed their masters and left, but you had 98, 99% that did not. We have to deal with that and talk about why didn't they leave? Why didn't in the South, when about maybe half of the people down South were Black during the Civil War, why didn't all the slaves uprise, kill their masters and go join the Union Army as opposed to digging ditches and making ramparts for their masters to keep slavery going? Why, when they did the 1990 census, was 90% of Black people still living down South working on the plantation with their masters? Why did they love their masters so much that they still refuse to leave them? Well, that's the question.
Let's get
and that's what we have to deal with now. The Stockholm Syndrome that keeps us connected to a system that's destroying us.
Let's get to another question from our audience. Go ahead.
Yeah, here's a follow-up question to a couple things that have been said. Why would we not want to teach all children our history, what actually happened, through an impartial lens, not through the racist lens that has determined past teaching?
Mr. Ellison, briefly, if we could just stick to that question. Why not just the lesson plan? What should we be taught? Why not teach them the whole thing, that Jefferson and Washington owned slaves, the history of race is complicated, the Tulsa Race Massacre?
We've come to an impasse in America where the citizens don't trust the government anymore. A lot of them just don't trust in the teacher. That's it. In a nutshell, they believe, after watching the public educational system, after watching these riots, after watching what some people have said in the press, Black Lives Matter, about tearing down the family, about Marxism, about destruction of capitalism, destruction of the family, they are saying that we don't trust you to teach our children impartially any longer. And that is their right. A parent, a mother that birthed their child.
So how do we
into the
gain the
world,
trust then, Mr. Ellison? How do we gain the trust? What should be taught in the classroom to gain that trust?
you don't gain it. It's done. It's over with.
Mr. Jeffries, Professor Jeffries, how do you respond to that?
Well, I have the great fortune of working with teachers, not only here in Central Ohio, but across the country. And I still have faith in our teachers. I still have faith in our public school teachers. I know that they want to teach history honestly. I know that they want to teach history accurately as well as effectively. But I also know that they are afraid because they are being targeted. You look at, there's this disconnect. We look at polling. Teachers, individual teachers, parents really respect and appreciate their individual teachers. They see the hard work that they're doing, but they get trapped in this echo chamber of schools are bad, public schools are bad, and all this other stuff. And so while they like their individual teachers, they will have some concerns about the broader public education system. So we have to be clear about what's going on. And we also can't pretend as though, these a small group of white folk, white parents who are clamoring about not teaching critical race theory are doing it because they're concerned about the education that Black children have been receiving in school. That's a myth. I mean, come on, that has never happened. This is a question of preserving. They're not worried about what white kids, what they might learn about Black children and the Black experience. They're worried about what white children will learn about the white experience, what Meemaw was doing back in the 1960s. That's their fundamental concern. So we got to be clear about that as well.
All right, let's get to another question from our audience. Diana.
Yeah, so as a takeaway, what can we as educators, and in particular educators of color, do in simple steps moving forward?
Professor Jeffries, you take that one.
Oh, this is critical. Educators of color, especially, have to take the lead because here, Mr. Ellison, I agree with you here. We have a long tradition of African American educators, African American teachers, not only at the college level, W.E.B. Du Bois and so many others, but K through 12, who have made education come alive for African Americans, and they did it with so few resources. I don't want to go back to Jim Crow. I don't want to go back to the era of racial segregation by law because we were doing that under-resourced. And you're right, integration had real fundamental problems because we didn't integrate on an equal basis and equal footing. It was just simply moving Black children into predominantly white spaces. So there's a legitimate critique there, but understand what that critique is. So it is now incumbent upon us, as we are increasingly moving into positions of decision-making where we can, but those teachers who are on the front lines to really model and lead the way about in terms of how teaching this history can be done both accurately and effectively. And we have great examples of that. We can look at the Philadelphia school system, right, which has incorporated, now hold on, Mr. Ellison, which has incorporated talking honestly and seriously about racism, systemic and individual, that has said, look, we're gonna take seriously not only what Dr. King was talking about and Malcolm X was talking about and Frederick Douglass was talking about and Ella Baker was talking about, but also these young people who are taken to the streets under the banner of Black Lives Matter. Now, we look at that, political service, look at that and say, oh no, we can't have that. That's teaching hate or some other silliness. No, that's doing exactly what we need to be doing. Talking about this history to all students in honest and open ways.
Mr. Ellison, what would your lesson plan look like?
Well, again, what people have seen in America is what the public education system has done to Black children in the inner cities. We've seen Frederick Douglass High in Baltimore and many of the inner city schools and how they've turned into monster factories. I see the public educational system becoming a system like the college system, where you have private schools, where you have religious schools, a litany of choice, which is freedom for all Americans. When it's not should be based on color, it should be based upon truth. And some people are not going to like some things, some people want other things to expand it, but parents have the right to decide the education of their children. They have the right, and it'll make the public educational system better, like UPS and FedEx make the postal service better. The competition will breed excellence on all levels. Don't fear it. The people that fear competition are the losers.
We've had the charter school system. We've had the charter school system for 20 years. We've had the charter school system for 20 years, and the results show that those schools aren't doing it. When you look at test results and placement and dropout rates and things like that, it hasn't. And this is not a new thing. These charter schools.
That is not my evidence when it comes down to D.C. and New Orleans. Now, I don't know what you're looking at, but when it comes to D.C., when it comes to New Orleans, their elevation has risen remarkably since they started putting charters and vouchers inside.
At least in Ohio here, the charter schools have not lived up to the promises, at least of 20 years ago.
And here's the good thing: they will be dismantled, and you can get others. But the public school system remains, no matter how bad it is. So if the charter schools are leaving, that's good. That's creative destruction. That's what we want. We don't want a bad charter school to stay there. But a bad public educational school stays there in perpetuity. There are some that haven't produced a good scholar in 30 years, and they will not close them because that's exactly what they want.
All right, we just have about 3 minutes left, and I want to try to wrap up this discussion and try to find some common ground. I think all of us, you guys who disagree on a lot of things, really would like to see a racial healing in this country where we don't have discrimination, where we don't have racism. Races can coexist peacefully and it's not a factor. It's a utopian ideal, I know. Mr. Ellison, how do we achieve that in your mind?
Look, I got to go back to my religion. I believe that I'm supposed to love everybody. I can't control if everybody loves me. I do know that there are going to be people out there that are going to try to harm me. There's a small percentage of them, and it ain't got nothing to do with color. Black people, white people, Asian, it doesn't matter. Somebody in that group is going to be a psychopath. And when I need to defend myself, the police are not going to be here, and I got to defend myself. So I love everybody. I treat everybody with respect, but I arm myself. I arm myself with knowledge for the wise man and a gun for the fool, and love everybody and walk my country as a free man. And I don't ask permission in my own house. This is my house. I helped build it, and I know my way around it.
Hassan Kwame Jeffries, are you optimistic that these conversations are difficult? Are you optimistic these conversations, these debates will help in the long-term process of healing the divide?
Well, I'm not particularly optimistic, I must admit, because we know that sometimes and too often in this particular moment, we have some folk who are dealing with facts and other folks who are dealing with propaganda. And so unless we can deal with an agreed upon set of facts that determine the reality in which we're living, then I'm concerned that even though we have a legitimate discourse and disagreement here, that there will be those who will take and only hear one particular side. But I am hopeful because the long history of education, particularly among African-American educators and African-American activists, has been pushing the envelope, bending that arc of the moral universe towards justice. And because we know that history exists, because we know that we therefore know that it will continue on into the future. So because I know that people are committed to teaching history honestly and effectively, because I know that people are public school teachers and teachers in general are committed to teaching the present in an honest and truthful way, then I am hopeful that that energy will win out over hysteria, and we will continue to do that going forward.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you to our panelists, OSU history professor Hassan Kwame Jeffries and author and Project 21 Black Leadership Network member Vince Ellison. And thanks to you for joining us. Be well.